The only newspaper in town was called the Squatters Sovereign. It was a pro-slavery newspaper. He bought that newspaper out when he was about 18 or 19 and renamed it Freedom's Champion because he was very much against slavery.
That's pretty cool.
And then when they had the Constitutional Convention for the state of Kansas, Atchison elected him as a delegate to the convention, but he wasn't 21, so they couldn't seat him as a delegate. So they elected him as secretary, and he wrote the Constitution of the state of Kansas. It's all in his handwriting. In those days, they didn't have typewriters. It was all written by hand. So he wrote the whole Constitution for the state of Kansas, and his signature is the first one on it as secretary of the Constitutional
That's very
Convention.
cool.
And then he served as like mayor of Atchison when he was young, and then when the war started, he was born in 1839, so the war started in 61. He was 22 years old, and he was appointed a lieutenant colonel, and the colonel of the regiment was from West Point, and he raised this volunteer infantry regiment, and then they started fighting in the wars, and the colonel got promoted up, and my grandfather became promoted to full colonel when he was something like 23 years old or something like that. And he was at the Battle of Chickamauga, which was the bloodiest two-day battle of the Civil War. More Confederates were killed in that battle, I read in one thing, than they were killed at Gettysburg, a three-day war, which is where the most people died. He was the commander of this regiment when the battle started the first
Was he
day.
with the Union or the Confederates?
Union Army, because he was very much against slavery.
Mm-hmm.
He hated slavery. And so when the first day battle, though, the brigade commander was killed, and he was a senior colonel, so he became the brigade commander at 24 years of age. And the first day's battle, the Union Army stopped the Confederates. In fact, in the overall battle, the Confederates had more people killed than the Union Army. But the second day, the commanding general of the Union Army made a huge mistake. First of all, he sent this second lieutenant out to check all the troops to make sure all the divisions were in the proper places. And this second lieutenant was so green, even though all the divisions were in place, he thought this one wasn't closed up on the division next to it. So he went back and told the commanding general that. Well, the commanding general, without checking it himself, just hastily scribbled an order to this general in charge of one of the divisions: close your division up on this division. Well, he meant the one next to him, but in his haste, he said the one two down. And the night before, he had publicly chewed out this general for not promptly obeying orders in front of all the other generals. Well, the first thing you learn as an officer is you never reprimand anybody in public. You praise in public and you reprimand in private. But he publicly chewed him out. The guy was humiliated. When he got this order, it was obvious it was wrong. But he put it in his pocket. He pulled his division out and started moving it down. And the Confederates were under attack at the time. And Longstreet had served with Robert E. Lee in the east, and they sent him with a whole corps out to the west to aid in this battle, which meant the Confederates greatly outnumbered the Union Army at that point. Mm-hmm. And he hit this very hole that they had opened up. He hit with his whole new corps, and my grandfather's brigade was right on the edge of it. So naturally, they outnumbered about 10 to 1, and they were swept from the field. And they had two choices: get out of there or be captured or killed. Well, three choices. And so that whole thing dissolved. And but there was another general named Thomas who held until nightfall, or the whole thing would have been a disaster for the Union Army. But as it was, he held, and they couldn't get past him. So they all pulled out in the dark and went back into Chattanooga. And they were in Chattanooga, and they were down to eating. There was the Confederates held the High Ridge, Missionary Ridge, and around the town. And they were in Chattanooga, and they ran out of food. They were eating their mules and their horses and all that. But Ulysses S. Grant came out with a rescuing army and broke through and saved them. So my grandfather always loved Grant. And he joined up with them, and he brought one army under Sherman, another army under this guy who had been the commanding general of the whole U.S. Army, but he was demoted down to just managing it. And they now outnumbered the Confederates, and they were going to attack them. And so he sent Sherman on one side to attack one side. He sent, I think it's McClellan on the other side to attack the other side. They attacked all morning and didn't get anywhere. They were completely defeated. So I finally decided to send grandfather's army to Cumberland, which had been the one that was holed up in Chattanooga, that they hadn't even used up to then. And the orders were to go up to the bottom of this Missionary Ridge where they were and just stop at the bottom. But when they got to the bottom, can you imagine you're stopped at the bottom and they're up there shooting down at you? And Time magazine put out an article about this war, about the battle, and said that Colonel John A. Martin said, "We can't live here. Let's go up." And they started up the side, and they hit the Confederates, and they said, "Remember Chickamauga," which is a battle they'd been in where they lost, and they swept the Confederates off the top. When that happened, the whole Confederate army collapsed and started retreating. And of course, they never did stop. That's when they started the March to the Sea, which ended the Civil War, because they cut the South in two. And you know, there's a lot of Confederates that think, well, the Union Army. But if the Union Army hadn't won the war, either we would still have slavery in the South, and the United States would be two different countries, or we'd at least be two different countries. Well, I don't know anybody in the South that wants two different countries or wants slavery in the South.
Tell Bryce your grandfather's final rank in the Army.
Oh, he was promoted to Brigadier General when he was 26 years old.
That's a big deal.
Will you show Bryce his Civil War sword yet?
Yeah. Here's his sword that he probably killed people with.
Oh, wow.
Because the officers would ride on their horse and they had their sword.
That's his actual sword.
Yeah, that's the very sword he carried. And that's why he's in that war.
Show Bryce your Civil War statues, Grenade.
Yeah, and these are the statues. This is one. This is called the Good Scout lost in the woods. A friend in need, and this guy, he's wounded and lost in there. And
Is that a
black
slave?
guy's getting him out. Yeah, the slave is getting him out of the swamp.
That's very cool.
Lost in the swamp. And this is wounded to the rear. These guys have both been wounded, and they're ordered to go to the rear. It says he's going to do one more shot. He's getting his.
Will you tell Bryce the history of those statues, where they came from?
Well, when my grandfather came home from the Civil War, he married my grandmother, and he had a bunch of children. And he held a bunch of different jobs, but finally he was elected governor of Kansas, and he was reelected. He served 2 terms as governor of Kansas. And while he was there, this sculptor who did these gave them to him because he fought in the whole.
So that makes those
war.
statues how old, Grenade?
Well, let's see. He got them in the 1870s, I guess. So they're well over 100 years old.
So almost 150 years old.
Almost 150 years old. Yeah. And this book over here gives the people who were made general right at the end of the war. This is Brevet Brigadier Generals in blue. And,
This is very cool.
there he is.
Oh, wow.
He made it in 1865, and he was born in 1939.
Wow.
He was born in
1839.
1839. So 39 from 65. You can see
What's that book?
this is the brigadier generals that were made at the end of the war. This is a little summary of him. He was governor of the state of Kansas from 1885 to 1889. 10th person ever to hold that office in Kansas. I'm born in Pennsylvania. And
That's really cool.
in 1857, when only 18 years of age, he came to Kansas, bought the newspaper known as the Squatter Sovereign, published in Atchison, and changed the name to Freedom's Champion. He continued to publish it until his death.
And then he had how many kids?
Well, he had, he had 4 girls and 3 boys. And unfortunately, all the oldest ones were girls. And then,
One of the oldest was a boy, but he's the one that died.
well, no, he was 12 years old when he died, but he was younger than any of his sisters, I think.
Was he?
Yeah, he was. All the boys were. There were 3 boys. My dad and my uncle Paul, who became the editor and publisher of the Lansing,
Yes.
the journal in Lansing, Michigan, in the state capitol, the only newspaper in the state capital of Michigan. He was the editor and publisher of the newspaper.
Oh, wow.
He was a
And then your
first lieutenant in World War II, and he fought in the combat
Yes, sir.
engineers, which meant they went out ahead of the attacks and cut the wire and blew up the mines and
Oh,
got
really?
ready for the attack. And I read some of his stuff. He told about the shells bursting around him, the guys next to him being blown to
It
pieces.
sounds very interesting.
and, you know, and,
well, thanks for telling Bryce about all that, Renee.
Thank you.
yeah, well, mighty proud of